In previous seasons of Destiny 2 PvP, you may remember me going over a subclass tier list that I created. Well, with Forsaken drawing to a close, I think of no time better than now to do it again. As with all tier lists, this is opinion-based, so you may not agree with every choice of mine. You don't have to. In fact, use the comment section to state your case, and maybe we can all learn from each other. I will mention that I have quite a bit of hours with each subclass, rather than just maining a couple of them and then telling you what every subclass is like from the opposite perspective. I also didn't just settle for using these subclasses in quick play against your normal level 20 brand new fresh PC players. Nope, I took it into the competitive playlist. I asked other players who I consider experts with each subclass to give me pointers and tips on how to make the most of it. Before revealing the tier list, one last thing to mention is that I based the tier list off the current weapon and exotic armor meta, and I'm assuming that the player using this subclass has phenomenal aim and game sense. So here it is. Graphically, it's not too fancy. I figure with all the extra subclasses that Forsaken's bringing, it's not worth making a pretty graphic because there are just too many subclasses. I'll zoom in or cut out to each whenever I'm talking about a specific tier. For S tier, we got Mid Gunslinger, Top Dawnblade, Mid Striker, and Mid Voidwalker. Some common traits of an S tier subclass mean that they have a strong neutral game. They have access to abilities either quick or those abilities are deadly. They have an excellent super and a wide variety of exotic combinations, loadouts to abuse. This list within tiers is in no particular order. I don't think that Mid Gunslinger is the best or the worst out of the four. I just think all of these are so high above the others that they warrant their own tier. So let's talk about Mid Gunslinger. Some may know it as Blade Barrage, that's the name of the super, or Way of a Thousand Cuts. As far as its neutral game goes, this one has an excellent one. You have access to 3 powerful grenades, the Incendiary, which burns foes, which means they're not healing, the Trip Mine, which means you can spike it and detonate it for instant damage, or use it to block a revive or something, and Swarm Grenade, which is sort of a careless but powerful grenade. Its melee ability is a volley of incendiary knives, which is good because if you tag somebody, they're not healing. You also don't have to predict your opponent as much because you throw multiple knives. Throwing knives are also accurate from the air, so if you lack a perfect inner option, throwing knives will suffice. Even hitting 1 out of the 3 knives can secure a kill with certain impacts of weapons. I personally like comboing this with a shotgun, because if they're barely living from the shotgun, just throw the knife because it's faster than shooting a second shotgun bullet if you're using the highest of highest impacts. If you happen to tag an opponent with any sort of incendiary damage, yes, including your knives, yes, your grenade, yes, even some weapons like the Polaris Lance and Prometheus Lens, yes, it activates the perk Playing with Fire, which cools down your dodge and your melee. In today's seemingly shotgun-heavy meta, the Hunter dodge is more important than ever. You can use it to break a line of sight, disengage, you can use it to be evasive, you can use it to proc extra perks like Enhanced Bomber, Dynamo. You can especially use a marksman's dodge to instantly reload your weapon and pop back around the corner with Kill Clip. Now that I've discussed the neutral game, let's talk about the super, which is obnoxious. It's not only just a shutdown super, it's a shutdown super that you can then flick across the screen and throw a second shutdown super across the map. More specifically, this super throws a volley of explosive homing knives and the user, believe it or not, gets damage resistance while this is active. But if that wasn't enough already, it differentiates itself further from other supers by actually having the capabilities to destroy a Ward of Dawn and everybody inside. But wait, there's more. You can throw on an exotic like Shards of Galanor so that any knife hits can restore super energy. And so if you combo this with what I said earlier about using Playing with Fire to proc more Dynamo, and then you switch to Shards, you can have a super that's both frequent, powerful, and offers very little counterplay from your opponents. But if you weren't lucky enough to get your hands on Shards of Galanor this season, don't worry, there's other powerful exotics. My personal favorite is the Young Ahamkara Spine, which enhances your Trip Mine. But in the competitive playlist, I frequently see people rocking Dragon Shadow, and that just makes a lot of sense. To recap, Mid Gunslinger seems to have it all. Long be gone the days of actually shooting people with the golden gun, now make way for the golden gun panic button. Moving on to the next, we have a lot of subclasses to talk about, so I'm going to blaze through these. Kind of an unintentional pun, but I'll ignore it. Let's talk about Top Dawnblade. I'm aware that some of you are already questioning my placement of Top Dawnblade, so let me explain. Rhetorical question. What is the best weapon loadout in Destiny 2 right now? While I anticipate a variety of answers, I think the most given answer is going to be Not Forgotten, plus a Dustrock Blues shotgun. Let's really dissect this loadout. What makes it powerful? Well, the Not Forgotten has a blazing fast TTK, kills in 3 shots, and those 3 shots are accurate from the air. I'm grossly oversimplifying these weapons for sake of time in this video. For Dustrock Blues, it is the longest one-shot kill shotgun. So take a weapon that's perfectly accurate from the air and combine it with the longest one-shot kill shotgun, and we're cooking with some fire, because Top Dom Blade allows more aerial options for shooting. Normally, when you use a Warlock or a Titan jump while aiming, while trying to shoot, you cannot do that, because you have to disengage your jump ability in order to shoot. Top Tree Dom Blade doesn't follow this rule. You're allowed to shoot while moving while activating your jump ability. So with that one sentence alone, you probably understand how Top Dom Blade complements the Not Forgotten. But what about the Dustrock? Well, that one's simple. Top Dom Blade has an ability called Icarus Dash, which is kind of like a hunter dodge, but in the air. You can also activate it on the ground and then do a short hop to just do it quickly on the ground. This amounts to the same benefits as a hunter dodge, but you can use them more frequently. So if just having those 2 abilities wasn't enough, the subclass also incentivizes using those abilities by granting you additional grenade and melee energy for getting in-air kills. As for the grenade option, it has Fusion Grenade, Solar Flare, or Firebolt. Fusion Grenade's kind of garbage. Solar Flare is one of the best in the game for AoE because not only is it an AoE grenade, but it also burns your opponents. And Firebolt's great, but I think Arc Bolt's better, and I'll explain that when I talk about Arc Bolts. The melee ability Swift Strike means that if you tag an opponent with a melee, you get temporary perfect in-air accuracy. So if you're crazy enough to use this subclass with the snipe and you proc Swift Strike, well, you can swiftly float at the top of the ceiling and snipe somebody off the spawn. Finally, let's talk about the Super. The Super is definitely worse than its bottom Dom Blade counterpart just because of the length of time, but you trade off that length of time for more additional evasiveness and no tracking to the Dawn Blades. I think of Top Dom Blade more as a counter super or a bait super than a slaying super. Even when considering the strength of something like Mid Voidwalker, which we'll talk about later, you can use Top Dom Blade Super to float at the ceiling barrier, using your dodges to remain at the ceiling barrier, safe and sound from the Voidwalker, while you just throw Blades of Flame. To recap, Top Dom Blade takes the arguable best loadout in the game and makes it even better. It also lets you have access to your abilities more frequently, just for playing in the air as the subclass implies, and the super can be used as a pinch counter super against some of the other S tier and A tier options. Continuing on, talking about Mid Striker, this subclass has already gotten me 5500 in Season 5's competitive playlist. I'll note real quickly that Titans are different on PC and console because Titans have access to Titan Skating on PC, which is a movement feature or exploit, depending on how you see it balanced in your eyes, that allows you to move way faster than you should be able to. While I personally think that Titan Skating is broken, skillless, and every other adjective that means bad, that doesn't mean that I took it heavily into account with this subclass tier list, so this one still should hold pretty true for console or PC. Let's get back on track. Mid Striker has the option of 3 grenades, Lightning, Pulse, or Flashbang, all of which are adequate options. Not the best, but definitely not the worst. Its melee ability, Ballistic Slam, is borderline idiotic, but that's the beauty in it. It's so Titan, if I had to describe it. It is a 45-degree slam that hits your opponent for 130 damage, and any tag you get on them gives you a little bit of extra super energy, and if you secure the kill, think of it as double the amount of super energy that you're supposed to get. If you combo this melee ability with certain exotics, yes, you can land a one-hit kill with this ability, but against the best of the best players, it is extremely risky. You can actually use the Ballistic Slam to lead into your super to extend the amount of range that you can cover. Speaking of the super is called Thunder Crash and is the epitome of a Shutdown Super. It is a camera-controlled missile titan that blows up anything in a small village. It cancels bubbles, it cancels other Thunder Crashes, it cancels everything. You might think with what I described so far that this subclass is somewhat mediocre, but that's because I haven't talked about the perk Inertia Override yet, which means if you slide over ammo, you get a 20% damage increase, specifically to your weapons. Damage increase to your weapons. But what this allows you to do is use different archetypes that are out of the meta and suddenly make them meta because they now have a faster TTK or less shots to kill than other competitive options. You also reload your gun, but to me, the special part about Inertia Override is the extra damage. Even with the high impact snipe on certain resiliences, you can absolutely body shot some people, which is always satisfying to punish people who choose to run low resilience. For exotic recommendations, no shit Sherlock, use the one-eyed mask. It is busted, it is broken, it is disgustingly good. But if you're like me and not lucky enough to own a one-eyed mask and you play the competitive playlist and constantly run into 4 people using one-eye mask on the enemy team, you'll find yourself constantly questioning yourself on whether you should actually shoot your opponent, because shooting your opponent puts you at a disadvantage because not only are you marked for a stupid amount of time, they can see you through the wall, they get extra damage on their gun. Maybe enough to tip it to a 2-shot instead of a 3-shot with Memento Mori Ace of Spades, which is, you know, a free weapon that everybody gets, so why wouldn't they be using it? Plus, Ace of Spades flinches like a motherfucker, so have fun looking at the ceiling every gunfight, not to mention that you're marked, so if you disengage, they can see you through the wall, bank a grenade, a fighting line, something. But if they somehow pick up the kill on you, they get gifted an overshield, so all of these negatives for just shooting your opponent, you might start questioning yourself. You might even consider not shooting your opponent, which will then lead to a slower overall reaction time of you. Imagine hesitating every gunfight in a competitive match because shooting your opponent is a disadvantage. This exotic even has it in the description. It has the audacity to say, if you dare to shoot your opponent. This is a first-person shooter. It says it in the title. If you dare to shoot your opponent, of course I'm gonna shoot my opponent. That's the point of the game. And then the icing on the cake is that week after week after week, using every powerful engram opportunity, you just will not get this mask, so your opponent will have a perpetual advantage over you in the competitive playlist. And to make matters worse, no frequent balance patch, no Xur selling this so at least everybody has access to it, no ability to curb the RNG of obtaining it. Oh, it's frustrating. But I'll save that conversation for another day. Mark my words though, if Destiny's ever in a state where RNG plays too big of a role in my enjoyment of PvP, well then I might take a short hiatus until the problem is remedied. It really comes down to personal preference. I enjoy playing PvP no matter what, but I really hate shooting some guy in a cave for countless hours. It could be 1 hour, it could be infinity hours, just to get a competitive shotgun so that I totally don't get destroyed in PvP. My issue is that there's no real light at the end of the tunnel in regards to these grinds, so I personally think it's unhealthy of me to continue pulling at this slot machine, not really knowing if there's an end in sight, when I just enjoy playing PvP. So the alternative is to either set up custom lobbies with friends, which I will do, but I'll probably just end up playing something like Smash Ultimate in the interim. Yes! So back on track after that very long-winded but arguably necessary tangent, let's talk about exotics for the mid-striker. There's one-eye mask, of course. There's Syntheseps, which means that if you're surrounded by opponents, you get a temporary increase to melee damage, which results in a one-hit kill with Ballistic Slam. There's Dune Marchers, where if you sprint for a short time, you have electricity effects added to your melee and your Ballistic Slam, which also results in a one-hit kill. There is Mark 44 Standicides, which give you an overshield whenever you charge your Ballistic Slam by jumping. So you can use this to more easily close the gap with the shotgun, and if they happen to shotgun you early, at least you have enough health to one-bang them. There's also Armamentarium if you want a more basic double grenade option, but I personally like Syntheseps. What I like to do is fish for the surrounded bonus through the wall, and then Ballistic Slam just any unfortunate person. To recap, I think that mid-striker is strong because it offers an adequate neutral game, a very powerful super, and the Inertia Override can be used to have the capability to use a weapon that maybe isn't seen normally in the meta. For example, if you had a 110 hand cannon with Rampage, you can slide over ammo, 2-tap somebody, proc Rampage, and then 2-tap the next person. And all this just for sliding over ammo because everybody and their mother uses a shotgun? Yeah, I'd call this S tier. The next subclass to talk about, I won't be going too in-depth on because this is the most brainless pick in S tier. It really does have everything. Mid Voidwalker has the unique blink jump ability, but you don't feel like you have to use it, it's just an extra option. Burst Glide is very good because it combos with the super to allow movement. I'm not going to call it an exploit, let's call it a movement mechanic that can keep up with the speed of something like a Dawnblade. The grenade options aren't very important, but I would personally stick with either Vortex to have area of effect or Axiom Bolt to push somebody out of cover. The reason the choice of grenade isn't that important is because Mid Voidwalker has a special shotgun grenade ability where you charge your grenade and you release it with a close quarters void blast that can pretty much decimate any shotgunner within a couple meters. Also, in the spirit of sticking it to shotgun users, its melee ability pushes back people. It can even kill them by arc attacking them into the wall, but it pushes them back and then it makes them blow up. It's not a one-hit kill, but it's pretty close to it sometimes. To make matters worse, if you get an ability kill, you get some health back. Now we talk about the super, which is a roaming, ground-based, teleporting bomb attack. It has two simple attacks. One, you tap the trigger once. It's a small explosion, I would say akin to like a grenade launcher blast. The second is a charged attack, so you just hold the button down, and this releases a nuclear warhead. One would think with this level of power that it would be a short super, but it's actually quite lengthy. So to recap, Mid Voidwalker's got good movement, a shotgun grenade, a melee that knocks people back, a super that counters most supers and is a roaming super, and it gets some health back with abilities. Great. For exotic pairings, use literally anything. Moving on to A tier, these are all fantastic choices and something that you'll commonly see in the competitive playlist, but they lack one X factor or one portion of that universal lethality of S tier. Some of these subclasses made it to A tier solely on their ability to counter S tier. Again, as we get deeper into this subclass tier list, I'll talk less about each subclass because I've already told you what makes the ones before it that much stronger. If I had to describe top Night Stalker in 2 words, it would be radar manipulation, because you have invisibility on demand with your dodge roll and a melee smoke ability that pings on people's radar. A lot of players in Destiny, especially top players, have their eyes glued to the radar, so as a top Night Stalker you could take advantage of this and totally ruin their playstyle. While radar manipulation is good on its own accord, the tether really seals its fate in A tier. The tether cancels any super. But, and this is a big but, giant caveat, you have to use this preemptively. For exotic pairings, anything that improves the dodge, overall mobility, or just simple neutral game will suffice. I think it's really rewarding to learn how to use invisibility to always have the drop on your opponents. Next up, Mid-Arc Strider. This is a direct counter to the Blade Barrage, Way of 1,000 Cuts Gunslinger. It accomplishes its Blade Barrage counter with its super, which is an enhanced version of Arc Strider that allows you to use the pull to block attacks. It not only blocks, but it also reflects, so you can reflect the entire Blade Barrage back at the Blade and his team. But unlike Tether, you don't have to use this preemptively. If somebody starts the Blade Barrage animation, all you have to do is activate your super, and the animation of activating your super actually reflects blades back. But beware, because a Mid Stormcaller can actually counter the Mid Arc Strider, so there's sort of a bit of a check and balance system. So talking about the class overall, Mid Arc Strider has access to Arc Bolts, which is my recommendation for Grenade. There's also Flux, and there's also Skip. This is as good of a time as ever to talk specifically about Arc Bolts and Fire Bolts. The way that Fire Bolts work is they have an initial scan radius, and within that scan radius, it will send out multiple bolts from the center. So as long as you aren't looking at the center of where a Firebolt lands, you can avoid it. Arc Bolt's different. It does the same thing where it has that initial scan, but if it tags one person, the bolt connects off the person and not where the bolt initially landed. As a result, in my experiences, Arc Bolts are usually more useful than Fire Bolts, but that doesn't mean Fire Bolts are bad, that just means Arc Bolts have the capacity to do something better. For its melee ability, the Arc Strider has a slide wave. It's like you slide, you hit the melee button, and an arc wave comes out of your knee. You can use this to deal with 2 directions simultaneously. You send the arc wave in one direction, and you shotgun the other direction. For controller users, this is an extremely powerful movement option. Mid-Arc Strider also has the perk Ebb and Flow, which adds to the uptime of its neutral game, but that's not as important as the super. If you block anything, even including gunfire, you get supercharged, so you do a lot more damage with your Arc Strider than normal. And right now I think it's bugged, but the Arc Strider hit combos Like there's the equivalent of fighting game button combination that you can do to squeeze a little bit of extra damage out of the Arc Strider, and this particular combo used to counter supers, but now it doesn't, I think because of a damage resistance change. Anyhow, mid Arc Strider doesn't have that problem because if you want the old combo back, all you gotta do is block. For exotic pairings, you can get away with a lot with mid Arc Strider, but I'm particularly fond of Lucky Raspberry or Shinobu's Vow. Both are fantastic options. Continuing on with the list, let's talk about mid Stormcaller. This one has the Kamehameha Electric Blast out of the sky, that's the super. And like I said before, it actually goes through the mid Arc Strider block. Some of you may be questioning why I include mid Stormcaller in A tier. That's simply because of the uptime on its super. It's not the most flashy super, but the fact that you can have it multiple times a game over other supers makes it a strong contender for A tier. I'll contrast this with mid Dawnblade in a little bit, but essentially use mid Stormcaller for the super and use mid Dawnblade for the neutral game. So you see both kind of lose on that X factor that is the total package of S tier. Mid Stormcaller has access to 3 grenades: Arc Bolt, Pulse Grenade, and Storm Grenade. Since Storm Grenade is better on Top Tree Stormcaller, you're pretty much stuck on Arc Bolt or Pulse Nade. And since you can get Pulse Nade on Striker Titan, I think that Arc Bolt is the obvious choice. Its melee ability is deceptively good. It shoots out a ball of lightning that when it explodes hits a perpendicular lightning bolt, which is very forgiving. While Way of 1,000 Cuts mid Gunslinger has more uptime on the knives, the mid Stormcaller makes up for it with a much more forgiving melee ability. Think of it not as a great melee, but rather as a shitty grenade. And yeah, if you were thinking it combos with an Arc Bolt, you'd absolutely be right. Also, if you're prone to taking excessive damage like I am, you proc the perk Pulse Wave, which gives you and your allies a movement and reload boost. Awesome. As for Midstorm's exotic pairings, this is essential to its placement in A tier. Geomag stabilizers make this subclass, and unfortunately, it's tied to RNG. So you might have them, but you also might not. If you don't have them, you can get away with Stag, making this a pretty good option, but its real beauty is in using both the Stag, Dynamo, and your boots, and then switching to Geomag stabilizers when you're 2/3 the way to your super, because the way Geomags work is if you sprint with 2/3 of your super, it fills the last remaining 1/3 of your super. So, unlike other people, you only have to work for 2/3 of your super, but it gets even worse. Because with your Kamehameha Blast, your electricity out of the sky, if you cancel it early after killing one person, you'll save 1/3 of your super, so all you have to do is just get another 1/3. And now on the opposite spectrum, we use mid Dawnblade for its neutral game rather than for its super, whereas we use mid Stormcaller purely for its super. Mid Dawnblade is my baby, and I have so much bias towards a subclass that I almost put it in S, but like I looked at it logically and said that it's not a very self-sufficient subclass, so it has to be bumped down to A. I'm not saying you can't use this in Rumble, I'm not saying you can't even win with it in Rumble, but if you're talking about S tier, the full package, mid Dawnblade is not that. Mid Dawnblade is the quintessential healer of Destiny. You can charge your grenade, which turns it into a healing grenade that you and your allies can walk through. Yes, I said you and your allies, so everybody benefits. And if your allies walk through it, you get a benefit to cooldown for your next grenade in Rift. And if your allies walk through your Rift, this could be a healing or empowering Rift, you also get bonus benefits to your grenade, melee, and Rift recharge rate. The melee ability is simple. If you tag somebody, you and your teammates are empowered and do a little bit more damage, just enough to tip the scales in favor of some weapons like 110 RPM hand cannons. The super is called Well of Radiance. You drop a sword, and in that sword is a very large rift that gives you both enhanced healing and enhanced damage. It is very powerful. I call it the mobile command center, but it's extremely susceptible to being countered by simply shooting the sword. So to effectively use it, you have to hide the sword behind cover and use the edges of the Well of Radiance to peek out. While it's not the flashiest super, it can definitely establish map control, which can then snowball in your favor. I personally go with a 50-50 offensive-defensive healer build, where I use empowering rifts to potentially body shot people with the snipe, while using my grenade to heal my teammates, and then using the rift to take power for free. While this subclass is nothing phenomenal on its own, its contribution to the team is what solidifies its placement in A tier. For exotic pairings, you can't go wrong with a lot of options, but I really like Starfire Protocol. It allows you to hold 2 fusion grenades which you convert to healing grenades, and then stand in a rift, and if you shoot people while in an empowering rift, it recharges your grenade further, so you pretty much always have uptime on your abilities. Moving on, Top Sentinel was the top dog in Season 3, because it had so many options, and giving an overshield to your teammates could turn the tide of the match. With shotguns and snipers in the mix, not so much anymore. This is because going for a melee kill when everybody has a shotgun out is suicide. So as a result, half of the subclass rarely comes into play, and so for that reason, it is no longer S tier. It does, however, boast one of the most powerful grenades, the Suppressor Grenade, the only grenade in the game that can take people out of supers. This, combined with the ability to choose whether you want a roaming super or a Ward of Dawn bubble, makes a very strong case for remaining in A tier. The reason that a choice of bubble is a really strong option is because in objective modes, people sometimes have to enter the bubble, and as a result, you can kill them while inside of your bubble to start charging your next super. Combining this playstyle with the exotic Doomfang Pauldron means that you will likely have your super before anyone else. So use that bubble to defuse a bomb, capture a point, get some power ammo, and maybe even combine it with tractor cannons so that if somebody wants to counter your bubble, you either wait for them to enter your bubble and tractor cannon them, or you just springboard out of your bubble and shoot them out of the air with tractor cannon while they're mid-animation. If you're very smart about your bubble placement, you can also peek out of the edges of a bubble while still retaining the armor light, meaning you can shoot out of your bubble with having like 4 times the amount of health as a normal Guardian. But if you preference the mobile super, that's okay too. Top Sentinel can get that done. And if you have the Ursa Furiosa exotic, just for blocking, if they shoot you, you get additional super energy if you survive the Sentinel. The strength of these gauntlets rely in their presence, not necessarily their strength. By having on Ursa Furiosa, people will intentionally not shoot at you, so you can use that as a free opportunity to just wipe them outright. While Top Sentinel isn't S tier anymore, I do think that it is a true A tier with the amount of competitive counter options it gives you. I want to quickly take the time to contrast Top Sentinel, Mid Sentinel, and Bottom Sentinel. Top Sentinel gives you the most options. In my experience, Mid Sentinel and Bottom Sentinel have a bit of conflicting subclass trees. So as a result, they both feel like slightly different one-trick ponies. I'll explain it this way. Top Sentinel to me gets its strength from the Suppressor Nade, the only nade that can counter any super. So by wasting the grenade in your typical engagement, you cannot use it as a super counter, because once people see that grenade leave your hand, they will openly just super. Both bottom and middle tree have subclass options that say if you use your abilities, you get your abilities back faster. But the problem with that is, like I just said, the Suppressor Nade is just too valuable to waste, so you're only getting half the benefits. In either case, both middle tree and bottom tree can get their super in under a minute under the right circumstances with Doomfang. But I still feel that the overall flexibility of the Top Sentinel is what allows it to be the superior Sentinel to the other two, although not by much. Now moving on to Midnight Stalker, the bread and butter of this subclass is that whenever you're crouched and you get a headshot kill, you get wall hacks and invisibility. While this initially sounded busted, you gotta realize that every subclass in this game has some degree of cheese. And so crouching is kind of a big requirement considering how much influence aerial playstyles have on winning a match. I also have to take note that you have to get a headshot, which means your weapon has to be precision capable, which compresses your loadout options. You can't just use a normal shotgun, because it's very unlikely that you're going to get a shotgun headshot. Instead, you have to opt for something like the Chaperone, which isn't bad, but it's still compressed. But on this exact same note, using the Not Forgotten, which is already one of the most powerful weapons in the game, just got even more powerful because now your 3-tap or 2-tap is rewarded with wall hacks and invisibility. I already talked about the strength of invisibility with Top Night Stalker, and just because the super recently got buffed, I would think that this is a contender for even S tier at this point, but honestly, after using it for a while, I'm going to say that it sits at A tier because it's actually not very common to proc the invis and keep it procced for very long. Against arguably the best opponents in the game, they make themselves very hard to get headshot, let alone while you happen to be crouching. The radar in Destiny is very obnoxious, and to a good player it might as well be wall hacks. but the Midnight Stalker's Flawless Execution, that's the name of the wall hacks ability, it allows you to see past the edges of the radar where people are even spawning up. So again, the same reason that Mid Dawnblade is on A tier, Midnight Stalker remains in A tier, because that is really useful when you can convey that information to your team. Whereas using it by yourself, you're the only person who really gets to take advantage of that. Now we talk about the Super, which was recently buffed and is noticeably better. Very noticeably better. If you happen to have the exotic Quizinvest, you can have an infinite Super. I'm not going to tell you how, I'm not going to explain it, it's just really busted. Please don't do this. And if you do this against me, I'm going to teabag you. A lot. A lot. Okay, back on track, gonna fly through these. B tier, bottom Arc Strider. It benefits from having its uptime on its dodge and grenade significantly faster than its other Arc Strider counterparts. Because of the frequency and strength of Arc Bolt, this can straight up by itself carry bottom Arc Strider to the B tier, even though its super leaves a little bit to be desired after the fighting game combo Super Counselor doesn't really work anymore. Also, its melee ability, Concuss and Blow, as the name implies, if you tag an enemy with this, they are temporarily concussed, and as a result can't immediately respond to you, which means that you can actually outplay shotgunners with just your melee. So if you want one of the best hunter neutral games, the bottom Arc Strider is probably for you, but if you want a more succinct S tier option, go with the Blade Barrage. Moving on, bottom Dawnblade used to make the entire lobby quiver in fear, but then the Nova Warp attacked and it did its job arguably better. But to me, the bottom Dawnblade is the superior super. The super is the only reason that it's in B tier because its healing ability, the Phoenix Dive, got nerfed and it's not as significant as it used to be. So overall its neutral game is kind of poor, but it makes up for it with a superior super. Moving on very quickly, Top Striker is one of the most basic bitch classes in this entire list, and that is why it is strong. It has a above average neutral game and an above average super. The neutral game stems from its ability to have 2 grenades. Most people opt for 2 pulses because on PC, if somebody sees a lightning grenade, they usually just shoot it off the wall. And if you're smart with flashbangs, just don't look at them. Since you already get 2 grenades without the use of the Armamentarium Exotic, you can instead run the Skull Fort to have infinity shoulder charges, which actually is the reason that it's in B tier instead of C tier. Having unlimited shoulder charges that regain your health is very powerful, but it's not game breaking because to me, if somebody's using this strategy, it's like delivering me free shotgun kills. The true beauty of having on-demand shoulder charges is that you can always use it as a movement ability, or you can use it as a alternative close quarters option. So you can run like Snipe Hand Cannon and still feel that you have the capabilities of a shotgun with your shoulder charge. The super is a roaming Fist of Havoc, which actually gets countered by a lot of the S tier options, so as a result you want to use it a little bit more conservatively than you're used to. Mid Sentinel I already talked about, but I want to specifically mention its super. Its super is a roaming shield block attack, which if you're blocking with the shield, your teammates can shoot through it for the equivalent of weapons of light, but also if a super is inside of your shield block, they take damage. So more often than not, in a stalemate situation where somebody's trying to take out your shield and you're blocking, they try to wait for you to drop the block. But instead of dropping the block, with Mid Sentinel you can just walk up in their face and burn them to death. I wholeheartedly recommend Ursa Furiosa if you're going to use this Sentinel. So now we made it to C tier. These are going to be your more basic average options. Bottom Sentinel has one thing and one thing only. It can get a super very fast by using Doomfang and shoulder charging into a group of people. If you get 1 kill, it counts for a quarter of your super from Doomfang, and then if you have a melee helmet ability that gives you extra super energy for melee kills, plus the subclass tree perk that gives you extra super energy for getting kills while surrounded, you can start working up to like a fourth, a third, even half your super in some close quarters sprees. For its super, it is stuck in the roaming Sentinel, but it can throw 2 frisbees. And if you have Doomfang on and you tag somebody with the frisbee, it extends the life of your super. But just like Mid Sentinel, I recommend using Ursa Furiosa anyway, just because it forces the enemy to act predictably. For top Sunbreaker, it has a strong grenade in the form of Thermite Grenade. It predictably rolls out in front and prevents people from globbing in a choke point. It has a shoulder charge equivalent, Melting Point, and it has a super that is very good at countering other supers, because the hammer explodes twice. The top Stormcaller revolves its life around the Arc Web ability. Enemies tagged by an arc grenade proc additional damage to groups of people. So instead of an arc bolt tagging 90 damage each to 2 or 3 people, it would instead tag 120 or 130 damage each to the whole group. What this amounts to is the cleanup potential of some weapons requires one less bullet, which is the world in PvP. On the other hand, if you use the storm grenade option and it arc webs people, you can kill them outright with just the grenade. Now, talking about the super, if you have both your grenade and melee charge up, your health restores to full. So you can use it as sort of a panic transition to roaming super immediately. While the super is active, you have the option of Ionic Blink, which means if you use your sprint key, you can blink forward and actually juke out a lot of supers. You'll definitely notice that a skilled Stormcaller can pretty much outplay anything in the S and A tier, but it requires so much finesse that it typically is going to find itself in the C tier because of the lack of overall options. Like when you compare top Stormcaller to mid Voidwalker apples to apples, you'll see that mid Voidwalker just has a lot more superior options. But I'd be lying if I didn't say top Stormcaller was definitely more stylish. I'll do D and E tier together for the next section. It hurts me how the mighty have fallen. Bottom Voidwalker used to be able to pop Devour and through sheer gun skill be able to wipe an entire team. You can still do that, but now the health bar doesn't matter because you can die in one shot. Of course, you can also kill in one shot, which is why it remains D tier and not F tier. Because if you're in a normal gunfight with somebody and you proc Devour, you peek out, you kill them, you get their teammate weak but not quite the kill, but then you pull out like a sniper shotgun, aim at the opposite side of the map, kill somebody, get your entire health back, and then you can continue the spree of carnage. It's possible, but it requires a little bit of extra finesse when you could just use, mid Voidwalker and just get everything for free. For E tier options and F tier options, these are simply just outclassed by better options. And so as a result, nobody in their right mind would use them when another subclass does literally everything better. The E tier options have a couple fringe builds and fringe scenarios where they're maybe better than other options, but the F tier have almost no redeeming qualities. So the fringe situation for each is what I'm going to talk about. For mid Sunbreaker, you can have a one-hit kill hammer build, which is pretty fun, but you can also use the super as a pure counter super to protect your blueberries. Bottom Gunslinger could be either used as a super catalyst or a universal counter to supers, but you have to aim for the head. Top Voidwalker only comes in clutch in the breakthrough game mode, where constantly throwing overcharge grenades onto the point means that the enemy cannot stand on it whatsoever. Finally, we're on the F tier. The existence of an F tier, even an E tier, isn't terrible. It's actually probably good because now that means that a bad option is available, and sometimes playing a bad option is fun. Use it as sort of weighted clothing, a training opportunity. If you remember way back when, Destiny 2 launched with 18 subclasses, and roughly half those subclasses were considered competitive. Now we have 18 competitive options out of the 27 available. To me, having 17 instead of 9 choices is a lot better. Good job, Bungie. Seriously, awesome. I mean, I kind of hate that the new Forsaken subclasses power creep towards the S tier, but at the same time, with other subclass tweaks, we have a lot more options, and that's more fun. So let's fly through this F tier. Why are some things in F tier? Well, bottom Night Stalker's only redeeming quality is that it can give invisibility to the entire team and maybe have more AoE effects with grenades. But top Night Stalker does a lot of that better. And invis for the whole team isn't 100% necessary, though I want to pull it off, but I still think it's more beneficial to just use top Night Stalker, throw a random smoke grenade across the map to interfere with the radar, or just simply use Gemini Jesters. In a world of instant kill weapons, top Gunslinger leaves a little bit more to be desired. Bottom Sunbreaker relies on its ability cooldown effect of standing in a sunspawn, but with shotguns so frequent, you can't really pull off the melee kill, which then means you're only getting uptime on the sunspots about half the time. Bottom Striker, again, doesn't have a shoulder charge, so it's more susceptible to death by a shotgun, because if it procs a melee hit, it gets weapon stability, and stability doesn't really mean much when you're going to probably use a shotgun. Top Arc Strider, exact same thing. It benefits from having a melee dodge chain, but you don't want to melee your enemy when you're just going to get shotgunned. bottom Stormcaller. It can offer arc buddies to your teammates, but the thing about arc buddies is it does like anywhere from 10 to 30 damage, which yes, it changes the shots to kill with some guns, but if you're talking about a support class, the healer Dawnblade just does it better. Not to mention that the arc buddies, they do show you where your opponent is, but it also gives your position away, and 10 to 30 damage probably means you're trading with the shotgunner that you're pursuing anyway. I would be especially annoyed with bottom Stormcaller if I'm pursuing a guy, my arc buddy tags somebody who's using a one-eyed mask, and I give him an overshield just because of the arc buddy. Thanks. So at an overall glance, I feel that there's some truth to my tier list, but please let me know in the comment section what your tier list looks like, at least what your S tier looks like, and we'll continue the discussion into the Black Armory. I'm hoping that there's some balancing changes around the corner, because seeing the same S tier can get a little bit boring. For those of you choosing not to purchase the Forsaken, I got you. This is the free-to-play subclass tier list. For S tier, we got bottom Sentinel with Doomfang, because you don't need a fantastic shotgun to take advantage of shoulder charge, and Doomfang is readily available. Top Dawnblade, because you can actually get Not Forgotten on a free-to-play account, and top Night Stalker with Dragon Shadow. A tier, you're going to have a feedback top Sentinels that maybe you can get some melee kills when you otherwise couldn't. Top Striker with the Skull Fort, top Stormcaller with the Karnstein, bottom Arc Strider with a Lucky Raspberry. In B tier, we got bottom Dawnblade, I recommend Transversive, top Sunbreaker, maybe Lion Rampants, bottom Voidwalker, again Transversive, that's an overall great exotic. In C tier, we got the same that you'll be probably seeing on the Forsaken list, same with the D. Bottom Gunslinger, top Gunslinger, bottom Stormcaller. And for D tier, we got bottom Night Stalker, top Arc Strider, bottom Sunbreaker, top Voidwalker, and bottom Striker. Well, 41 minutes later and at 12:03 a.m., my roommate decides to shower for some reason, so I feel like this is the spiritual end of the video and I might as well start making it the actual end. As far as content goes, I'm going to slowly transition out of no-lifing Destiny, so I'll maybe lose a little bit of this sort of in-depth knowledge on the game at large, but I'll be playing a little bit more variety games like Smash Ultimate and the lot. I'll still be posting PvP commentaries, but they'll be lacking a little bit of the competitive edge that they used to have. Instead, for Season 5, I'm just purely going to have fun with it. I'm going to use wacky-ass loadouts and just see what happens. And the problem with doing these sorts of commentaries lately is that I actually run into terrible opponents who just don't give me very good opportunities for commentary. It's just like they run into my shotgun without even shooting me or reacting. It's like they're level 20 chickens with their heads cut off. And I know people will roast me in the comments for posting that sort of gameplay, so it's frustrating that I have to fish for somewhat competent opponents. So the only solution I see to this is, instead of trying to make it so that commentaries are a learning experience, just try to turn it into something entertaining. Just use something stupid and talk about whatever comes to mind, even if that is also stupid. Just gonna point out that I am really blessed to have such an awesome audience. Thank you guys. I will definitely see you in the next one.